It was a Sunday morning like any other in the Limpopo Hills. The wind moved gently through the dry acacia trees, stirring up warm dust that painted the sky gold. Chickens pecked the earth just outside the chapel steps. Children ran barefoot between the tall grass, their laughter echoing softly behind the sound of bells. Inside a weathered clay brick church, roof patched with corrugated tin, walls painted with peeling white lime, a community had gathered. No electricity, no sound system, just wooden benches, a tambourine, and voices, raw, untrained. Pure. The congregation, men in threadbare jackets, women in headscarves, elders with canes, sang with eyes closed and hands lifted. They didn't sing for performance. They sang for survival. They sang to remember that joy still exists, even when the pantry is empty. And then the hymn broke. Not from a wrong note, not from exhaustion, but from the low hum of tires crunching dry gravel outside. A black SUV, dust swirling behind it like a curtain. No escort, no sirens, just one vehicle, one man. A door opened, and out stepped Julius Malema. No suit, no entourage, just a red beret, a plain shirt, and an unreadable expression in his eyes. The moment was quiet, but the world had just shifted. Inside the church, the air changed. The hymn faltered, then stopped. The tambourine dropped to silence. Heads turned, eyes widened. Children fell still on their mothers' laps. The man they had only seen on television, the one whose words sparked fire in Parliament, the one feared, loved, hated, and followed, was standing at the back door of their humble church. For a heartbeat, no one moved. A few elders exchanged glances. Was a mistake? Was he lost? But he wasn't lost. He was exactly where he meant to be. Malema removed his cap and stepped inside. He didn't wave. He didn't speak. He simply bowed his head as if crossing into sacred ground. Then, slowly, almost reverently, he made his way to the last row. The old wooden bench creaked beneath him. He folded his hands, lowered his gaze. The pastor hesitated mid-sermon. A bead of sweat traced his temple, but he continued, voice shaky at first, then stronger. And Julius Malema, the man known for thunderous speeches and confrontational energy, sat silently. No cameras, no tweets, no handlers, just a man in a sacred space, choosing, for once, not to be heard, but to listen. The sermon continued, slowly, almost nervously, as if every word now weighed more than it had moments before. The pastor, a man in his 60s with tired eyes and a cracked Bible, spoke of humility. He spoke of David, not when he was king, but when he was hiding in caves. He spoke of what it means to be broken and still belong to God. In the back row, Julius Malema sat perfectly still. The man who once roared into microphones, the firebrand, the revolutionary, the disruptor, now looked down at the worn floorboards of a church with holes in its walls and hope in its people. Every so often, he blinked slowly. Once he closed his eyes. A long breath escaped him, not political, but human. He was no longer a headline here. He was no longer commander-in-chief of the economic freedom fighters. He was simply Julius. When the sermon ended, the pastor hesitated. He glanced at the congregation, then at the back. A silence lingered in the room, not heavy, but expectant. And then the pastor did something that no one expected. He stepped away from the pulpit and said softly, "Brother Julius, would you honor us by closing in prayer?" Gasps. A few heads turned sharply. A deacon frowned. But Julius stood. No hesitation. No announcement. He stepped forward slowly, as if walking not toward a pulpit, but toward something far more vulnerable. Red beret in hand, head slightly bowed. He stopped at the front beneath a wooden cross nailed to a wall that smelled of dust, candle wax, and old tears. And then he spoke. His voice was low, not the commanding, fire-sparking voice of rallies and interviews. No, this voice was uncertain, exposed, almost tender. "Lord," he paused, swallowed, then tried again. "Lord, I know many people only see my anger. They hear the loudness, but they don't know the silence behind it. They don't know what I carry, what I've lost, what I've buried. The room was still. Some shifted in their seats, not out of boredom, but from emotion too large to hold still. Forgive me for every time I fought harder than I listened, he said. For every moment I tried to speak for others and forgot to speak to you. I've been called a leader, a troublemaker, even a monster. But right now, I just want to be your son. Gasps turned to sniffles. A woman in the third row wiped her cheeks. An older man removed his cap and lowered his eyes. Help me, Lord, to carry not just the pain of my people, but also their hope. Make me bold enough to kneel, brave enough to change, and humble enough to be used. Then silence. No amen. No applause. No closing words. Just silence, thick, sacred, and full of something deeper than politics. Malema turned, eyes glossy, chest rising. He returned to the bench he came from, a different man. And even those who had walked into that church with contempt for him, even they could no longer deny what they had just witnessed. Not a performance, a surrender. The prayer ended, but no one moved. The wooden benches held people motionless, not by force, but by something deeper. Awe, reverence, something too sacred to name. Malema returned to the back row without a word. The pastor stepped aside, his hand shaking slightly. A baby cried somewhere in the corner. Birds fluttered outside the window. But inside, silence still reigned like a blanket over the room. Then, slowly, people stood, not to applaud, not to greet a politician. They stood because something holy had just happened, and their bodies didn't know what else to do. The service ended quietly. No final benediction, just glances, hushed murmurs, tears being wiped discreetly with cloths meant for sweat. Malema stood near the exit, hands behind his back. People began walking toward him cautiously. One by one they came, not to ask for selfies, not to challenge him on policy, but to say simple things. Thank you for being here. I judged you, but today I saw your heart. I lost my son last year. That prayer healed something. A child hugged his leg without asking. A young man, probably unemployed, probably angry at the world, asked if Malema would pray for him next time. Julius nodded, and then an old man approached, his cane tapping the ground, his face like the bark of a baobab tree, weathered, scarred, ancient. He looked up at Malema and said, I didn't vote for you, but today, I would follow you into fire. Malema didn't respond. He simply placed a hand on the man's shoulder and held it there, not as a politician, as a brother. Someone in the church had recorded the prayer. No lights, no microphones, just a cracked Android phone on 480p resolution. And the truth, that night, the video was uploaded to social media. No title, no tags, just one caption. He came to pray, and he meant it. Within hours, it was everywhere. Instagram Reels, TikTok stitches, Facebook reposts in Afrikaans, Zulu, Venda, Xhosa, even Swahili. Some laughed, some cried, but no one ignored it. Journalists called it a rare act of vulnerability. Critics who had once called him divisive, dangerous, and arrogant now found themselves quiet. Even some of his most outspoken political opponents admitted it. We still don't agree with Julius Malema. But what happened in that church? That wasn't a strategy. That was soul. The pastor was contacted by dozens of news outlets. He refused all interviews. It wasn't a story, he said. It was a moment. And the moment doesn't belong to headlines. But it belonged to people. Mothers who had lost hope. Sons who had lost their way. People who had stopped praying. All of them saw a man they thought they knew fall silent before something greater than himself. And in that silence, they heard something they hadn't heard in a long, long time. Faith. 3 weeks later, the dust had settled, but the echo remained. The headlines had moved on. The hashtags faded. The pundits found new targets. But deep in the hills of Limpopo, in a tiny clay-walled church, something had changed. Not the structure, not the size, but the weight of the space. Every Sunday after Malema's visit, attendance doubled. Not because people hoped he'd return, but because they had witnessed what was possible, a moment where truth outweighed politics. And then, without warning, he came back. No camera crews, no announcement, just like before. Same SUV, same plain clothes, same red beret, only this time, he held it in his hand as he entered. The church didn't freeze this time. They welcomed him with knowing eyes, as if he wasn't a politician visiting, but a brother coming home. He didn't sit in the back row. He sat near the middle, not to be seen, but to see. And during the service, he didn't speak. He wept, quietly, without shame, without wiping the tears, as if they belonged on his face now. Afterward, no one asked for autographs, no questions, only hugs. And as he stood to leave, the same pastor who once trembled in his presence now smiled and said, "Brother Julius, not every war is won by marching. Some are won by kneeling." Malema nodded, not with pride, but with gratitude. The next morning, in the red soil of his childhood village, long before sunrise, Julius Malema walked alone across a field where he used to play. The air was cold, the sky still black, and in his hands, a brick, a single red brick from the foundation of that tiny church, not stolen, gifted. "So you remember where you were rebuilt," the pastor had said. He placed it on his desk in Johannesburg, not in gold, not on display, just there, beside family photos and old speeches, unlabeled, but unforgettable, because it didn't need explanation. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about home, about stillness, about a man learning how to lay down his voice long enough to hear his soul. And long after the noise fades, long after titles shift, that moment will remain. A red beret, a dusty chapel, a whispered prayer, and the day Julius Malema knelt before something bigger than himself and stood up different. Some revolutions begin with fire. This one began with tears,